Welcome to Word to Action at Home. Word to Action is a Bible course we usually run at Willowfield. The aim of this course is to go deeper into God's Word, wrestling with how to apply biblical teaching in a practical, everyday way. The main purpose of the course is to help equip us in our devotions and Bible study at home, looking at how to engage with the passage or story or truth of this ancient book in a very relevant way. I hope you will find these recordings helpful and practical. I hope it will whet your appetite and encourage you to read and study and wrestle with this wonderful book. But most of all, I hope it will encourage you to see that you can do what I do. That you can take a passage and with some patience, with some hard work and with some practical tools, you can bring the Bible to life in a spirit-filled, life-giving, transformative way. So whoever you are, whatever your Bible knowledge, even if you've never read the Bible before, I'm glad that you're joining me for these studies. Be blessed. Hey, you are so welcome to Word to Action. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you're keeping well. This week we're going to be in chapter 4. So let's do what we've been doing over the last number of weeks. Let's take chapter 4 and begin to work through it, lifting out some of the key themes that are there. Let's do that now. Okay, Esther chapter 4. Let's work through the characters in this, or the cast in this chapter. So immediately in verse 1, we're introduced to Mordecai. In verse 4, we see Queen Esther. In verse 5, we're introduced to Hathach. That's the main characters in this passage. Now here's the temptation with a chapter like this. We, instead of starting at verse 1, we jump immediately down to verse 14. Verse 14 is the really famous "for such a time as this" passage, and that's where we start, and we kind of get distracted with that and go off on a tangent with that. In the next part of this tutorial, I'll show you the temptation or the danger or why that's not helpful. So let's park that for now. We'll come back to that in a moment. Some of the interesting things here. Look at Hathach. He is one of the king's eunuchs, we're told there. Now remember, we thought about this last week. We said that in the palace there were many maids and there were many eunuchs. A eunuch is someone that has been taken from their home. They've been castrated and they serve in the palace. Now in many ways, being in the palace as a eunuch or as a maid, you were looked after reasonably well. You had regular meals, you had a job in the palace. But remember, we said there's an element of being suppressed here. So this is Hathach, who's taken from his home, stripped of his identity, and is serving the king by looking after his queen. Now there's an interesting thing going on here, and this little back and forth between Hathach and Mordecai here. It's almost like he is a go-between or a mediator. Look at verse 6. Hathach went out to meet Mordecai. Then in verse 9, he returns to Esther with Mordecai's really important message. And then again in verse 12, Hathach goes out and gives Esther's reply. So it's this key part that he plays in here. This almost nobody, this figure that we would so easily overlook, has now become a go-between, has become a mediator, and takes up this key role. And I guess we could, and I don't think it's a stretch to do this, but I think we could jump from there and we could think of a gospel theme. We could think of Jesus, someone who was overlooked, someone who was marginalized in so many ways, someone who was considered an outcast or not liked or appreciated by those in power, plays this key role. He is a mediator between God and the people here. What I also want to look at in this passage is the posture. Look at the posture of Mordecai and look at the posture of Esther. We start with this posture of Mordecai where he tears his clothes, or tore his clothes in verse 1. He puts on burlap and ashes, and he went out into the city crying with a loud, bitter wail. This is a broken man at the start of this chapter. So his posture is one of being broken before God. And then as we look at Esther, we'll look at Esther's posture at the end of this. In verse 16, she calls for prayer. She calls for a fast. This posture of going to God. And I guess the question we're asking at this point really simply is this: who is Mordecai going to? And who does Esther go to in this? Let's look at that in a little bit more detail in this next section. Okay, so chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the famous "for such a time as this" chapter. As I said in that last little piece, we need to be really careful that we don't make this chapter all about us. The temptation is to jump to the end of it and begin to put ourselves at the center of the story. Here's one way that we might end up teaching the book of Esther. We'll start off by saying, do you ever feel like an Esther? Do you ever feel that you are marginalized, you're an outsider, or that you are a forgotten character? Do you ever feel that the plot of your life is somewhat mundane, but then against all the odds, you become important, you become a queen, you become this important figure in the story. And you have ideas and you have desires and you have dreams and you have plans for a better future, for a better tomorrow, for a better society. But time ticks by and days turn to weeks, that turn to months, that turn to years, and you're simply just going through the motions. You thought that you could influence, you thought that you could shape decisions, but you realize that there are people who are more powerful than you, more important than you, more significant than you, and they are the ones who call the shots. You might be in the most powerful palace in the world, but you might as well be that forgotten girl before chapter 2. Because no matter how hard you try, no one hears and no one notices. That is until a motivational speech from your uncle that catapults you into action and you realize again, against all the odds, that you were born for such a time as this. Do you want to be an Esther this week? Do you want to go boldly where no Esther has ever gone before? Then seize your purpose, seize your destiny. Why don't you awaken those dreams that lie dormant inside you? If you could only realize who you are, if you could only realize the awesome potential that is within you, then you could go change the world. Why don't you stand in the mirror this week and say, I have been born for such a time as this. I am going to make a difference. Go on, say it with confidence, say it like you mean it. I have been born for such a time as this. Seize the moment, seize the opportunity. And that might be one way that we'd preach this chapter. You've maybe heard it preached that way. It's very motivational and it's very inspiring, and I'm not trying to cramp your style. I'm not trying to burst your bubble, should I say, in this moment. But I wonder, do you always feel brave? Do you always feel that you've been born for such a time as this? Do you always feel that you've got what it takes to step into that moment or that situation? Because I guess if lockdown, I know it's started to ease now a little, but if lockdown has taught us anything, we're not as strong or as powerful as we think. And it's hard to change the world at the minute because the world that we've stepped into seems new and confusing, and there's new things that we're having to navigate and grapple with. And there's new struggles that we have in this world. And sometimes being born for such a time as this and carrying that weight and that pressure that we sometimes put on ourselves, or that need to always be brave and always be bold and always have strong faith, can actually be exhausting, and at its worst it can be really crippling for our faith, and we can feel deflated. Now here's the thing, I'm not trying to say that you do not have purpose and you do not have meaning and that you are not awesome. I think you are awesome. If I tell you that you're not awesome, then nobody will tune in to the rest of these studies. But I'm not saying that because that's what I think. I'm saying that because, well, God has called us with purpose. He has given us purpose. We are on this planet for purpose. Like I think of Acts 17:26. God has set the times and places where we should live. So you have a calling on your life. You have worth on your life. You have value on your life. You have dignity on your life. You carry something. You need to hear that. You carry something. You carry the presence of God. You have potential. You can change things. You can change situations. You can change worlds. You can have influence in your sphere of influence. So hear that. But you need to see all of that through a God lens. Don't see that as it's all about me and it's all on me. See it through a God lens where God is at work in you. God is shaping you, molding you, using you, putting you in places, giving you the words in the time and in the season so that He gets the glory and gets the honor, and that lives are changed, not through you per se, but mainly through what He is doing and saying in you. So hear that. I want us to go back again to think about what Esther does. Like, does Esther just put on her big girl pants and go and try to save the world at this point? No. Think of what she does at the end of this chapter. When she realizes who she is and who her people is and what her purpose is and what her destiny is, what's the first thing she does? She stops. She's still. She prays. She fasts. She goes to God. That's a really important posture in this moment and in this chapter for such a time as this. And it's a really important posture for you and I to adopt in this season that we find ourselves in as well. I want to think about praying at such a time as this. I want to think about those postures. Think about Esther's posture at the start of this or at the end of this chapter, but also think of Mordecai's posture at the start of this chapter. So look at verse 1. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. Mordecai's posture is one of weeping. Now that doesn't sound like praying, that sounds like crying to me, but there's something at work here. There's something happening here. Listen to this from Colin Jones. There is, of course, the natural mourning any man would feel if his own life, the lives of his loved ones, indeed his whole nation, hung in the balance. There is a deep bitterness and wailing and mourning at the potential loss here. That's one part of this. But listen to this from Deborah Reed. Mordecai's public display of mourning is significant because of two things. One, it induces the Jewish community to follow his example. And secondly, it allows Esther to become aware promptly of the threat to the Jews, enabling Esther's emergence as a deliverer of her people. Can you see what's happening in this moment? Mordecai comes to Esther for help. Who does Esther go to help? Esther comes to God for help. And that's why if you listen to the preach that I do in this, go to willowfieldchurch.online. If you listen to the preach in this, I do left out that we need not an Esther for such a time as this. Not to be the best version of you or me for such a time as this, but we need God for such a time as this. God shaping, molding, chiseling away, changing things, renewing things, reviving things in our life. We need God for such a time as this. Look at verse 15. Only God can deliver the people. I guess the big question in this story, the cliffhanger in this story is, what if Esther doesn't step into her calling? What if Esther doesn't go to the king? What if she fails her mission here? Then who is going to deliver the people? Who is going to save the people? And maybe sometimes we feel that in our life. Maybe we put that much pressure on ourselves to be like the Esther, going boldly where no Esther has ever gone before, that we are born for such a time as this, and it's only me who can act and do and save and conquer this situation. Once you place yourself at the center of that equation, then you put yourself under such pressure, and that is exhausting, and it all falls on you. Put God at the center, because this is a time where we need God. Because here is why. In verse 14, only God can save. Only God is able to save. Look what Mordecai says to Esther in verse 14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance, there's that word, deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Here's the thing, as Warren Wiersbe says. God will accomplish his purpose even if his servants refuse to obey his will. If Esther rejected the will of God for her life, God could still save his people. God is never in a hurry. He knows the end from the beginning. Now that throws up a wonderful truth, but there's a question comes from that. I love how Chuck Swindoll deals with it. What does it matter if I get involved or not? It matters greatly. It matters to your character. Yes, it's true that God has other ways to accomplish his objectives. He has other people he can use. He isn't frustrated or restrained because you and I may be indifferent. But when that happens, we are the losers. When we have been called for such a time as this, how tragic if we are not there to stand in that hour. Let me put it straight. I love how Swindle puts it straight here. Quit being so careful to protect your own backside. Stop worrying about what others will think. You don't answer to them, you answer to Him. He will help. He will give you wisdom and courage. You may only be one, but you are one. So risk. I love that. Let's step into for such a time as this by putting God at the center of that for such a time as this. You put yourself at the center, you will be exhausted, you will be frustrated, there will be too much weight for you to bear and for you to carry. Put God at the center. This is God for such a time as this. Hope you find this study helpful. Keep digging deeper into God's Word. Keep digging deeper into Esther and just mining out some of those truths. Be blessed, be encouraged, be safe. Look forward to seeing you next week.